Let's get it started. Great. So I would like to start by saying hello, everyone, and welcome to this event. This event forms part of the Architecture Fringe Festival 2025, running under the theme Reciprocity. It is supported by the Scottish Ecological Design Association and Earth Building UK and Ireland.
I am Tom Morton.
And I'm Becky Latour.
and this is our presentation. Excellent. So we're here in the guise of the Scottish Construction Council of Beings. We thought it'd be nice if there was one. So we imagined it into reality. We just made it up. And we made up a naff little flag as well. But there might be a real one out there that we aren't aware of with a better flag and excluding us humans from their events. There's a lot that we as humans are not aware of in the natural world, and we inhabit more and more separate lived experiences. And it's okay to make stuff up. It's kind of what we do as humans. We're creative beings. We made up the whole of the built environment, and we imagined into reality the climate and the nature crisis. And if we can do that, then we can imagine a different built environment. We can imagine into reality a different future. We can create a different kind of relationship between people in hard hats and the natural world.
So all beings in Scotland have their environments, which differ and intersect with ours. We imagine the council as a collective place where these intersections can be discussed. It's a bit like the room of requirement in Harry Potter, manifesting itself at this time when such spaces are critical to our shared future. And with our idea of putting nature, materiality, and place at the heart of decision-making, we acknowledge the influence of Bruno Latour.
And Kiki's going to put one of his talks into the chat.
So we're here as builder, architect and artist to reflect on our conversations with Earth over the last 30 years and to share how that influences our ongoing thinking and practice. We don't hold ourselves up as representing anything other than our own experience. And it's only a snapshot of some of our work. I know there are people here who share this space, and it'll be good to open up the conversation in the second half. Our presentation is really a provocation to a wider discussion.
So I think Arc and Rebearth think of architecture as a relational practice, the art of place in a world of beings we're in mutual relationship with, rather than the kind of the dominant mindset of a world of things for us to own and use. And if we think of our relationship as individuals with other beings, it starts in ourself and spreads out as we go through life, to our mother, and to family, to community, to our nation, humanity, the whole of our species, and then to the animals and plants and bodies of water and earth. And there are things beyond, aren't there? We've got dark matter and things beyond our planetary boundaries. And there's other kinds of relationships that you can put into this chart, including spatial relationships. We start out knowing only the womb, and we develop greater and greater spatial awareness as we go through life, to our home, to our neighborhood, our country, maybe our continent, to the entire land mass, and then to the entire biosphere. And we spend our life reaching out, drawing in these things in the outer rings that are more and more different to us, into our understanding of ourselves and how we understand our place in this biosphere of being. And so today we're going to be talking about these outer rings and our relationship to them. And they can take a while to relate to, but they're a lot easier to relate to than, dark matter and the entire cosmos. And dark matter is 2/3 of everything that's out there, and we really don't have a clue about that. So it's hard to articulate your relationship with that. And so staying down in our earthbound reality, it's a much easier relationship to get our head round. And that's really what we're going to be exploring today.
And the more we've looked at it, we can't separate beings and place in the same way you can't separate space and time. So this reaching out is our practice. To build with Earth is to take action in the present in a specific granular place at the intersecting flows of space-time and nature culture. This is going to be a presentation in 3 acts. We've got Hello Earth, Hearing Earth, and Making with Earth. And in that we echo the work of the Embassy of the North Sea, who have an 8-year process of 3 stages and who have assembled a Parliament of Things. Kiki's putting a link to that in the chat. So, what is Earth? Topsoil, subsoils, sand, gravel, silt, clay, bits of plants, fungi, animals, microbes, water, air, all of it. Earth is the living skin of the planet, dynamic, carrying memory, a restless body made of bodies. You can define Earth by size and shape, segregating and measuring them. The balance of sizes and shapes, the types of minerals, tells you something about the structure, movement, the character of the Earth, its history and place. But these scientific categorizations coming from the Enlightenment only take you so far. There's a point where your conversation goes beyond a technical discourse framed in a simple diagram. There is terroir to Earth. Soils are individuals, vested in place, with water and air as constant companions, just like us. And the closer you look at Earth's, the more individual you realize they are.
So 20 years ago, we led a research project for Historic Scotland looking at the use of earth and plants in the conservation of masonry ruins. And one day it took us to the last surviving turf sheilings on the moor of the Isle of Lewis. These are buildings made out of turf. And it took us to other places where plants and soil are part of the original fabric of the building and where they've colonized masonry structures, treating them as rocks in the landscape. And we kept seeing natural heritage and built heritage as one integrated material culture. But the conservation theory that we'd been taught didn't fit this way of making in place. Theories that revere authentic original fabric, honesties of repairs in clearly different construction materials. What is original fabric in a living system? It's more like caring for an elderly relative. You know, our cells change, every 7 years, apart from our teeth. We aren't the people we were born as. We share 35% of our DNA with daffodils. And there's more non-human cells in our bodies than human ones. So what is it to be human? And what is it to be a building? All our clear definitions of things started to fall away, and it took us to thinking of buildings as living systems within a living landscape, and people being an integral part of it.
It's that difference between practicing conservation and preservation and practicing care and kinship. Black houses are a great example of circular systems. In a building and place with animals, plants, and humans living in reciprocity. Farming and building are both fields where people develop strong relational practices with the earth, both in traditions of mutually sustaining practice, as well as in modern practices that are extractive and mutually damaging. Here we'll give a shout out to Mailing Loco and a work on From Field to Form. And there's another link in the chat. When we went to Orkney, we were looking right back to the start of farming and the oldest Scottish settlements in the Neolithic, 5,000 to 6,000 years ago. Here at Ness of Brodka, the site's the result of 70 generations of continual building in place. Building, taking down, making again, constant actions of care and maintenance using earth, stone and plants. A perpetual circular economy in one settlement over 1,500 years, where the place and its people become utterly entangled in a material culture. Midden is what what we would call recycled earth, a material of clay, sand, ash, bones, fibres, used to pack between the stones in walls, enclosing and binding in earth floors and finishes. The building was not made from, it was made with. We became the earth, which provided the grain and meat we took into our bodies, and at death our bodies were taken back into the earth.
But of course, our bodies are mostly water, not minerals. We're about 2/3 water, and there's water in earth. Even in the driest desert sands, there's about a bottle of water, half a pint in every cubic meter of sand. Earth flows through water, and water flows through earth, just like it flows through our bodies, and we swim in it. Water is the great transporter. Minerals flow through water into plants, animals, and us. Everything is in flow. Water binds, births, and breaks. It holds memory, it shapes time. And territorially, it's also 2/3 of Scotland, even though we call it Scotland. And of course, there's land beneath the sea. Soil has no boundaries. States are human invention. And because water is a transporter, Scottish settlements were built on rivers and coasts, these liminal places which are dynamic. And now climate change is seen as a threat to our settlements as the land is being taken back under the waves. And few places are more threatened than Orkney by climate change. And that informed our exhibition last year. And I think Kiki will put a link into the chat about the work we did on Orkney. But from a geological time perspective, everything flows, land and water alike. Scotland used to be south of the equator 400 million years ago and slowly flowed north. But our perspective as humans is short term, and we've become very fixed in the way we build. We settle by water because it flows and connects, but this puts us at risk from climate change. Part of our response must be to recover our flexibility, to get our flow back, to learn to dwell with change, adaptation, rather than imagined permanence.
So we are waterbound as well as earthbound, living beings together in flow states. And flow marks time. Earth time is slow time, but not as slow as rock. Our soils are so much younger and more lively than our rocks, 12,000 years compared to hundreds of millions. But soils are old and slow compared to us animals, unless you're on Iceland or Mount Etna, of course, which we were a couple of weeks ago. In Scotland, volcanoes have been asleep for a long time.
And all these outer rings of the pluriverse tell us is that different beings inhabit different realities, but they are relational. It's key for designers in our time to develop the skills to hear beings that are different from us and to develop new design practices to live relationally together. So if we heard the earth and the built environment, what would it say? We build with earth, we build on earth, but we don't do that with a culture of reciprocity. Let's just look at the language we use to talk about earth in the built environment. We talk about, nature becomes natural resources, or nature services, justifying nature's value by what it can do for us. We talk about green infrastructure, taking away its life and turning it into things. And land use, which is a legal term in Scotland used to control land, defining its use by its use to humans. And vacant and derelict is another legal and financial definition. It's vacant of humans, of course, but not of other life. We treat Earth as our slave to be exploited. Its only value is its function for humans. It doesn't hold an inherent value in itself. So if we were to develop a construction language of reciprocity with a more balanced set of values, how would that change our terminology for Earth?
Maybe one of the things Earth would want to talk to us about is sand, where we currently have extraction without control, which has taken us both to a dangerous place. In this picture, do you see the human hand or do you see the sand? We led some great workshops at the Architecture Fringe on sand yesterday. Sand's a great example to talk about because it's a ubiquitous construction material people don't think about, consumed at such a vast scale that it's been declared an endangered natural resource by the United Nations. Sand goes into IT, cosmetics, all sorts of industries, but mainly construction, concrete, glass, tarmac, bricks, and so-called land reclamation from the sea. Vast quantities mined on land, river and sea floor. Increasingly aggressive mining is causing huge damage to ecosystems around the world, especially in China and India. We consume about 50 billion tons annually, enough to build a wall 27 meters wide and 27 meters high around the entire planet every year.
Let's think about concrete, a mixture of cement and aggregates that all comes from the earth. The scale of consumption is staggering. It's the most consumed resource by humanity after only water, and there's something like 60 tons of concrete for every person on the planet. And together with other aggregate products, there's now more than the combined weight of all living beings. Cement is made by pouring limestone at 1,450 degrees. A ton of cement is responsible for this much CO2. I thought about how to put the 4.4 billion of these we make each year onto the next slide, and I couldn't figure it out. If you can imagine that in your head, 4.4 billion of these every year, that's what we're producing. Cement is around 9% of global CO2 emissions, more than aviation. If cement was a country, it would be the third largest source of CO2 after only China and America. And you hear, a lot about green cement these days, alternative zero emission cements coming out of labs backed by industry as a way to keep producing concrete. But that ignores the global sand crisis. Most of concrete, in fact, is sand and aggregates, which are locked together by the cement binder. And the limestone, sands, and stones all come from somewhere. That's 60 tons is our individual share, and it all comes from a hole in the ground somewhere. And eventually, it'll all end up back in a hole in the ground. Our standard construction cycle is take nature, rename it natural resources, extract it, process it into construction products, put it into buildings, after a while, take it back out, rename it waste, and put it back in the ground.
And this is how Earth disappears, sealed and forgotten. We're creating artificial mountains, monuments to forgetting, literally shoving our problems under a grass carpet. But the Earth remembers, it has memory. We take clean soil that is home to water and air and lots of other living beings and give it back broken and contaminated, sealed and separated.
In Scotland, we make 3 million tonnes of soil waste each year, and 99% of it comes from construction. All of Scotland's waste is only 10 million tonnes, so a third of our waste is construction soil, and it's a quarter of everything we send to landfill. And as with all of these things, Scotland's a small country, the numbers jump up alarmingly when you look at the global situation. In France, for example, just the city of Paris creates 20 million tonnes annually. That's 7 times the whole of Scotland, and 3/4 of it, 3/4 of all their waste is soil. It's hard to get a handle on these sorts of numbers. So the picture at the bottom here shows the size of that pile, 2 kilometres wide and taller than the Eiffel Tower. That's every year. Thanks to Stefan Kirkland for this slide. And when you scale it up to the world and you see what's happening in China and India, it's just scary. So last month we held a workshop about this, and I want to give a shout out to Zero Waste Scotland, Stefan Kirkland in France, Bauhaus Erd in Germany, BC Materials in Belgium, HG Matthews down in England, and the folks working on the HS2 project down south, all of whom are working to make progress in this area. And I think Kiki will give you a link to the Terre project in Paris, which is quite an interesting one. Circular systems are the route to thriving future, and we need to invest in putting them into our present. Working at big scales and at small scales, we need to find solutions that work at all scales. Scotland now has a Circular Economy Act and is developing its delivery plan. And in an attempt to reduce soil waste going to landfill and the amount of aggregates being mined, we've introduced wash plants. These are facilities that take soil, wash it with water to extract the sand and gravel and leave a commercially useless residue of silt, sand and organics, and which is now piling up in the 14 wash plants in the central belt of Scotland, which is the highest density of these in Europe. And you can see this process as perhaps akin to how urbanization causes desertification, because in this process, the biomass, nutrients and structure are removed from the ecosystem, its flow is stopped, it ceases to be home to other plants and animal beings, and it creates piles of grain that once had living earth. Our construction practice is consuming the earth that grounds us, that is our inheritance. We're slowly turning living soil into a wasteland, and we're doing that in Scotland at a rate of 2 tonnes per person per year.
A consumer warning now. There are other things out there branded as green tech, earth with synthetic binders and fibres, earth in plastic bags, mixed with other industrial waste to make something commercial or improved and recycled, in inverted commas. And that's not what the earth is asking for. Like our bodies gathering nanoplastics and the PVACs from what we eat and drink, what we do to the earth, we do to ourselves. We're just one biological system. So earth would say, stop exploiting us, maybe, stop consuming us. But it says other things too. There's a yes alongside the no. And one of the things it talks about is time. This is a piece I made that talks to this. With earth borrowed from Dysart Beach in Fife, a round cube of coal spoil containing a polished ball of clay. Here earth remembers forest, the sunlight and air on leaves that became rock, wrenched from the ground and burned to return to the air. The void represents the loss of forest, loss of the mining community, loss of life. Voids and absence have become part of our identity, and it's something important to prepare for more in the future with climate change caused by fossil fuels. So we need to condition ourselves for more voids and more loss, spatially, socially, materially, economically, environmentally, to cope with and process that coming loss. Maybe memorials are going to make a comeback. Points of reference for this piece are both the nest carrying life and the pottery vessels that carry both food and human ashes, places of material transformation.
Can we touch on death, just to cheer everybody up?
Sorry, everybody.
It does get cheerier as we go on.
Yeah.
If Earth is alive, then it's also experiencing ecocide as part of our nature emergency. And part of any extinction is a silencing of voices. You know, in the house of clay, there's a thin wall between the rooms of fired and unfired earth, and ceramics is an uneasy space for Becky and me to go into. To fire earth to 1100 degrees is so final, like death in a way, the end of cycles of making and unmaking, a fixed memory of something that was once alive. Julian Stair saw this in his Quietus, vessels which incorporated the ashes of people into the body of the clay, and the Extinction Explorers exhibition explored that too, which created reliquaries to extinct species. And I think Kiki's going to put a link in the chat to that work also.
And when cement locks up sand, it stops its flow, stops its voice. But it's just a question of time. It will fall apart. The atoms rearranging into something else. It's just a question of how long. So with these questions about materiality and change and listening to the earth, I began to draw with sand, and a poem emerged. Who speaks for sand? I am sand, shapeshifter and land maker, big rock becoming little rock, soft and slippery or sharp and full of bite, endlessly on the move with river and sea, or dispersed to the wind like seeds. In this cycle of comings and goings, my reach is wide and deep. You may claim to own me, but I will not be tied down, not for long anyhow. When you were young, we played together with sticks and pebbles, your bare feet mingling with my bare bones, as you shape and carve me into monuments and moments. A world of worlds where geography is small and hands are huge, and you write your names big and bold on my skin before I melt into the undertow. Soon you begin to gather my colourful offerings in your pockets and take me home to the museum of tiny things, a microcosm of life gathering dust on a shelf among fossil and forest memories where I dream of wilder times. The older you get, the more you want. Mapping, digging, quarrying, crushing, washing, sieving, casting, grinding. You manipulate me into submission and freeze me in time, bound to your need for things to be hard and held, consumed in the blink of an eye. But I will not yield, and I will break, because I'm rock becoming, and I will return to where I began.
So maybe Earth is also saying to us, earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Every building you ever build decays back into the earth, no matter how hard it is or how fancy it is. The earth takes it all back. And this reveals the fallacy of people building to leave a legacy. Why put such a huge effort into making fixed things that won't last and that damage our long-term planetary well-being? If we work with it on Earth's terms, it will work with us. It's asking for reciprocity. So how do we do that? There's two reasons why the just transition to net zero carbon emissions is so difficult for the construction sector. Firstly, because the way we do the built environment at the moment is really damaging to the natural environment and to people. And secondly, because the built environment is everywhere and it affects everybody. But if you can turn that coin over, the other side is, the fact that it does affect everyone and is everywhere makes it a really powerful tool for change that can benefit everyone everywhere. And that's why diversifying agency, giving others a say, is so important as a vehicle for change. And all these things that are so screwed up in our relationship with Earth and construction simply show how bonded our relationship to Earth is, and therefore its potential to become a really positive relationship. We need to find the ways to unlock the power in this relationship for good outcomes, both for people and for Earth. And that's transforming exploitation into reciprocity.
If you go with the flow, if you come into conversation with it, respecting its character and integrity, then you can work with the strength of Earth, its ability to make and remake, always becoming, its infinite recyclability, the miraculous plasticity of clay, release creativity of form, borrow it for a while, allow it to express itself and then return it, no damage done. Of course, we can find the answers to the future by looking into our past. We've been making buildings for over 10,000 years, but only in the last 200 have we been doing it in a way that trashes the planet.
I love this building in Kashan in Iran. It's one of the best at illustrating what we're talking about. Imagine this place before there was a building, just a flat area of earth. And then what the people did was dig a cone-shaped hole in the ground. And with the earth that they dug out, they made bricks, which dried in the sun, and then they stuck the bricks together with mortar made out of the earth to build a dome over the hole. Now in this place it's hot in the day and it's cold at night, so they put out shallow pools of water which freeze overnight, and then they put that ice in the hole below the dome, and then they could drink cold drinks on hot days. So it's an ice house. So I went in the doorway and scrambled down to the bottom and looked up and saw this. Now, they didn't have to make something beautiful. Nobody was going to see this but the ice. And now the building is abandoned and it's slowly falling down back into the hole that it emerged from. And it's such a beautiful example of borrowing from the earth to make our life comfortable using skill and material science, and taking the opportunity of the act of making to create a thing of temporary beauty to mark that exchange between people and place.
In Scotland, we have our own traditions to rediscover. This is Dr. Mark Thacker working with the turf in Glencoe. Alongside Brian Wilson, they cut blocks of turf from the land adjacent to the building and carved them into walls, doors, windows, thick and cosy for many winters, then composted back into the land to feed fires, crops and creatures. We're not proposing mass housing made of turf, and land ownership and access to natural materials is a whole other debate. These lessons in reciprocity are worth revisiting.
We can, of course, also mine the Anthropocene urban fabric. This is the Chapel of Reconciliation in Berlin, where a church that survived the Second World War was blown up after to create firing lines along the Berlin Wall. And after reunification, the earth debris was used to make the rammed earth walls of the new chapel by Martin Rauch as a symbolic act of renewal. Extraction can have a benign legacy. Here are the former clay pits of the Errol Brickworks, which have been designated a SSSI because of their biodiversity. And here, near where we live, is the huge moraine sand and gravel deposited by the last glaciers. On the right, you can see the sand pits that are slowly rotated across the landscape, and on the left, Burnie Loch, which was a sand pit 25 years ago and has become a wetland nature reserve, and other ones have become fishing and swimming pools. So in a way, it's slowly returning the landscape back into the wetland that it was for 10,000 years before it was drained for agriculture in the 19th century. It was just borrowed for a while.
And an example of one of our buildings, a park shelter in Errol, made with earth and straw from half a mile away, on a gravel foundation, designed and built with local volunteers. This is about rethinking the value of local materials and respecting them as a result of natural processes, not over-processing or preserving, but designing and building with age and change in mind, letting earth be seen for what it is, impermanent and imperfect like us. And we can show different ways of building in different settings. This was a training event in France where we explored the continuum of earth, building methods that are not fixed categories or generic techniques, but a spectrum of possibility shifting from one form to another. This is how Indigenous traditions evolve in close relationships with people, materials, and place. And by exploring the spaces in between well-worn modern classifications, we open up new ideas and new interpretations of what went before, restoring the earth and reshaping our narratives of our earthy past, which in turn change our perceptions of what might come next. And the Coboge project has shown how we can translate these kinds of approaches into mainstream construction procurement. And just a little look back at that, the Dysart cube, and on the right, another example where we strive for something more rooted and connected, shaping with and being shaped by the earth. This is at Silverburn. There are design parallels to the Dysart cube in the nearby Silverburn Hide, where we worked with local volunteers and a mental health charity. People who don't normally have agency or opportunity to work materials and co-create their built environment. This making and shaping in and with communities is powerful stuff. It comes with all kinds of challenges and constraints when it sits within a conservative and capital construction industry, largely dislocated from place, but it can create a ripple of change that can travel.
And that takes us to the theory of care, which I have to say has become a personal preoccupation of mine for the last few months. We care for buildings as they care for us. Materials that are perceived as weak, needing maintenance and renewal, teach us to care as a regular practice, a good habit that helps us care for ourselves and for others. Things that are marketed as maintenance-free only teach us not to care, to take, use, throw away. It's much better to form, sustain, and let go. That's like our experience in relationship with other people and maybe other animals and plants as well. We heard this phrase recently, the tyranny of maintenance. And there is a thing where care can become a burden, a duty, it can be exploitative or a damaging relationship. and we need to avoid these by enabling caring relationships through equity and agency. Because if properly framed, relationships of care are fundamental to the human relationship to place.
Working with old buildings made of earth, you realise the importance of imperfection and authenticity in forming relationships. The importance of human making as interaction and touch. Touch is the most intimate sensory means of making, massaging a building into being, meeting ourselves in a material and building. So if buildings are made of imperfect living beings, and through that we intertwine our beings, then they carry multi-generational conversations with past and future human and more than human beings, channeled through place. This is what Patrick Geddes called genius loci. We are what we breathe, build, eat, inhabit. We are porous beings. Where is our edge?
So this thinking sits in the context of international progress on the rights of nature, especially in South America, New Zealand, Canada, but also Spain in a European context. And a shout out here to Jude Barber and Louise Welsh on the Who Owns the Clyde podcast. I think Kiki's going to pop a link into the chat there. And, you know, you start with the questions, who owns the Clyde, because you're frustrated by its condition and your lack of agency. And from a right of nature perspective, you know, doesn't the Clyde own itself? And then the whole concept of ownership becomes problematic. It's more about belonging than ownership, and that starts you to take you into a much deeper conversation. You know, does the Clyde belong to the people, or do the people belong to the Clyde? And then it becomes a conversation about mutual interdependency. People and river, built environment and natural environment, nature and culture, nature culture, and then bang, you're right back in the center of those circles of empathy. And so there is this petition going to the Scottish Parliament, and I urge you all to sign it online. It takes about 10 seconds. Kiki will put a link in the chat. Tell all your friends, human and more than human. So if rivers and mountains are legally recognized as beings, what about Earth? Legal recognition for non-human beings as a person in law is a way of bringing nature into our power structures, making a fundamental change in recognition of nature from being an object to being a subject, from a thing to a being. Things don't have rights, but beings do.
This movement is led in places where Indigenous belief systems are trying to engage with dominant Western legal systems of power. So for us in the global north, in UK as a former colonial power, and Scotland as a seat of the Enlightenment, it's a way of moving on from that legacy mindset, not defining our relationship with nature through ownership, but recognizing nature as beings through legal processes is a useful way of actually making change happen on the ground. Here can I nudge you to the Rights of Nature podcasts, which are great, from Pelle Thiel in Sweden. That'll be in the chat. For practitioners in the construction and built environment sector, rights of nature could be a process to help us develop a new mindset and practice, turning our conversation to ones about mutual belonging, shared places and co-creation.
But because construction is a heavily regulated sector in serious conflict with nature, we can also imagine how rights of nature might be applied through law and regulation to force change. And if we imagine rights of nature into our political constitution, if we were, say, to write one for Scotland or for the UK, it might then be reflected in building standards, in planning, and in the action of all public bodies. And if the UN right to a home can be applied not just to humans, but to plants and animals, they too have a right to a home in Scotland. So in building homes for humans, we should not remove the homes of other beings, and that includes the earths and the waters, who are the foundation for all life. But in advance of such a plurinational constitution, we could do what the new institute in Rotterdam did, appoint representatives of nature onto its board, becoming not a co-op, but a zoop, changing the conversation, the mindset through inclusion. Maybe CEDA, maybe Becky, maybe your organisation, maybe the James Hutton Institute could try that. Let's change our language to the conversation we need to rebalance and to replace our earth at the heart of our decision-making and our practices of care.
This quote is where we're at in our practices just now. It's about changing culture, mindsets and practices, and it's a long game. This is our practice: treasure from dirt through human touch. The intelligence, sensitivity of the human hand, giving temporary form, revealing its natural beauty by relational practices, reciprocal, good for both, letting Earth speak of itself through us and helping us appreciate our place in the world through acts of creative care, alongside all the other beings that make their homes with Earth. Thank you.